So first of all, thank you so much, Deborah, and the other members of the programme committee for giving me this opportunity to present the results from the research offices of the Future Survey conducted by Research Professional News. So for those of you that don't know RPN, it's a specialist publication which focuses on research policy and funding. And in fact, it's the only publication with this very niche focus. So it's been around for around 30 years, and it's primarily read and aimed at institutional leaders and the research office, but it's also read by government policy units and think tanks. It has a variety of outputs, including daily international news bulletins, and also 2 fortnightly magazines, one based on the UK, which is called Research Fortnight, and one called Research Europe. So the results come from 2 international studies that were carried out last year. One was conducted on research office staff, and the other was targeted at researchers. And each study received more than 800 responses. Now, we know that different institutions structure their research service teams very differently. And so we've used the term research office very broadly to cover any of the main support structures for research within universities and institutes. In terms of the respondents, the range of roles and seniority are vast for the research office, and they include people fairly on the ground, like research development officers and research compliance and ethics officers, but also include directors of research services and all the way up to vice provosts and pro-vice chancellors. The research responses were dominated by senior positions, so mainly tenured professors, departmental heads, and senior faculty, but also included some tenure-track researchers and PhD students. So before we delve into the details, here are the key findings. So unsurprisingly, the research offices currently are focused on obtaining more funding, demonstrating research impact, and improving research quality. In terms of the main drivers for change, these were identified in the survey as cost pressures, demonstrating research impact, and coping with research assessment exercises in the regions that hold them. Traditional publications were still the most common way of measuring research impact, but it was clear that there was a sense in the research office that other measures were becoming more important, and we'll go into more details in the subsequent slides. Surprisingly, research intelligence wasn't identified as a major concern. One of the barriers to success of the research office, the main barrier to success, in fact, was identified as being a lack of effective engagement between the research offices and researchers themselves. Well, actually, let me just go back to this slide for a second, just show you the demographics. If you look at the graph at the top, so the geographical breakdown of the respondents from the research office were mainly from the UK, North America, and Europe, whereas for the researchers, it was mainly from Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand. And it's important to note that not all respondents answered all of the questions. So back to this slide. So this slide shows how research office priorities are expected to evolve over the next 5 years, and how they differ from the researcher expectations of the support they get from the research office. So wherever you see figure numbers, they refer to the figures in the report itself, and I'll share a link to that at the end of the presentation. So if you look at the graph on the top left, this is in response to the question, what is the research office priorities? Or in fact, what do research officers think that their university or institute's top 3 priorities are for the moment? And the most important area was obtaining more funding to increase the volume of research, which got 74% of the votes, followed by demonstrating research impact and improving research quality. Now, the same top 3 were identified as priorities in 5 years' time. However, demonstrating research impact rose to 58% and improving research quality, 51%. Increasing OA publications remained a low priority at around 11%. When we asked researchers what their expectations were of what the research office provides for them, they were most likely to mention the facilitation of access to funding, research funding opportunities at 73%, closely followed by support with research proposals and bids at 70%. Around a third of researchers also expected support with compliance with OA mandates and other regulations, and only 18% expected assistance with measuring and reporting impact. And this was, in fact, the lowest scoring option in the survey for researchers. So this slide shows us what the Research Office thinks will be the biggest drivers of change between now and 5 years' time. So cost pressures, unsurprisingly again, came out as the top answer at 56%. Demonstrating research impact and research assessment exercises were the other top three areas. Domestic policies, external rankings, EDI, DEI on this side of the pond, initiatives were each mentioned by around a third of respondents. AI, OA requirements and international politics were the three least referenced drivers of change. And I think especially for this audience, it's quite a surprise to see AI and OA at the bottom of the list. And it's also quite interesting to see international politics in last place. Research offices clearly think that changes in the domestic landscape are far more likely to drive change than international affairs. So in terms of research assessment exercises, RAEs, these were identified as the third largest driver of change. And in regions that conduct RAEs, a quarter of respondents identified team resource as the biggest challenge. They just are overburdened by the amount of work required to do these RAEs. This was followed by gathering of information from researchers and understanding and second guessing what the changes in impact criteria that they're going to have to measure will be. There were regional differences. So overall, 40% of respondents mentioned RAEs as one of the biggest change drivers. However, in the UK, where we have a national exercise called the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, which happens more or less every 7 years, this figure jumps to 71%. And this contrasts sharply with the figure from North America, where no such framework exists in the US, the most populous nation that responded. And it was just 22% of respondents thought that REs would be a key driver of change. Surprisingly, Australia and New Zealand also scored quite low, given that they do have national research exercises, but the response rate from respondents was very, very low here. So that's a statistical anomaly, one might guess. Okay, so this slide looks at which types of impact research offices think they have to measure now, that it's most important for them to measure now, and which they'll have to measure in 5 years' time, as well as the ease of measuring these different factors. So if you look at the graph on the left, so in the middle of the slide, the graph is ordered by the types of impact in order of the decreasing impact in 5 years' time. So in terms of impact measures now, publications and citations were the front runners, according to the Research Office, followed by commercialization activity at 40% and societal benefit at 39%. This changes dramatically in 5 years' time. Societal benefit measures jump to top place at 56%, alongside big increases for DEI initiatives and SDGs. And publications and citations drop down to 42% and 39%, respectively. However, what we can see on the graph on the far right is a tension between the high priority impact measures in 5 years' time and the ease of measurement. So unfortunately, the top three types of impact that grow in 5 years' time, societal benefit, DEI measures, and SDGs, correspond to the three measures that they find hardest to calculate. Researchers have a very different perspective. For them, publications and citation impact reign supreme at 88% and 82%, with clear water between these and every other response. Now, in 5 years' time, they also think this is going to be the most important thing. So publications and citations, you remember from the previous slide, were also the top responses for the research office, but with far less dominance. And as you remember, these measures dropped below societal impact in 5 years' time. But in contrast, researchers didn't really have the same opinion. So societal benefit jumped from 16% to 27%, but this is far less than the 56% reported by the research office. And only 14% felt that DEI measures would be among the most measured aspects of impact, and sustainable goals were even lower. They're around 6%. So much has been made of how the fast developing world of AI will impact research and research outputs. And yet only a quarter of research office respondents cite AI as a key driver of change. And again, we see some regional differences here, with the UK even, UK-based respondents putting least store by AI driving change. Just 15% considered AI to be a key driver of change. And this is significantly less than North America at 28%, Europe at 32%, and Australia, New Zealand at 35%. This could have to do with the timing of this survey that went out last year, coincident with some big news about the next research assessment framework. And so people were probably more sort of worried about what they were going to have to do in terms of the next research assessment framework than any other possible changes. In terms of AI, we did look at, even though it wasn't considered to be a key driver change, we did look at sort of sentiment among research officers towards AI, and there was some fearfulness that their jobs could be taken over by AI, as there are in many other industries and sectors. But there was a positive aspect to AI, and over half of respondents thought that AI would be useful for compiling information for grant applications and for the analysis of grants lost to improve future chances. And in general, it was this sense of AI being useful with sort of large-scale analyses and sort of compilation of data that they thought that they're very overworked, this could be useful for them. There wasn't really much of a sense that AI could threaten the actual nature of the outputs that the universities were creating. We asked the research office which were the three main challenges they faced. And these were pressure on budgets and resources, unsurprisingly, time pressure, again, unsurprisingly, staff recruitment and retention, and the UK particularly, there was a focus on this, and successfully bidding for funds. Again, we have these regional differences. Almost all of the world, other than the UK, had budget and resource as the most cited challenge, whereas with the UK, it was the time pressure that was most difficult. Again, this probably had to do with the timing of the survey going out at the same time as the announcement of the next REF. So to delve a little bit deeper into the challenges faced by research offices, we asked research office respondents to identify the three main problems their institution faces when bidding for funds. The most frequently mentioned issue was ensuring effective management between researchers and the research office, with more than half of respondents, 52%, naming this as a major challenge. Other challenges identified were resources, 48%, understanding why bids were unsuccessful, and the resource available for internal peer review. I don't need to tell this room that one of the most pressing challenges for the research community is maintaining the integrity of research outputs. So what we did here is to look at which threats to integrity the research office felt posed the greatest threats. So pressure to publish was by far the most cited, with 63% highlighting this as one of the three biggest threats to research integrity, followed by insecure employment practices, cultural issues such as bullying, and the activities of predatory journals. We also asked what universities and institutes were doing to counter this. 64% said they were offering training, and 65% said they were developing research integrity policies. Worryingly, less than half mentioned, 41%, that they were investigating complaints against their researchers. Even more worryingly, 13% of research offices couldn't identify any steps that were being taken to mitigate concerns about research integrity. We've seen earlier that the biggest challenge to winning research funding was effective engagement between researchers and the research office, with more than half of respondents naming this as a top 3 challenge. However, when we asked who are the major partners within your institute when it comes to supporting research, the most frequent response was, in fact, researchers. So again, we've got a slight tension there that the biggest partner is the partner that there's most friction with, followed by faculty deans and the Provost Vice-Chancellor's office. Next up was the library, and in terms of collaboration with the library, OA compliance at 62% was the top response, and this was by a large margin, with scholarly communications and generating bibliometric analyses making up the top 3. So as well as the sort of set questions, respondents were able to provide some free-form comments. And here are some representative quotes that sort of give a flavour to the research office feeling hidden, which is a word that was found used a lot, undervalued, and basically disconnected from faculty. They were seen as admin support and faculty didn't want to speak to them. So I'll just do the first couple of lines of each quote. You can read them yourselves. So students and teaching are seen as far more important than research at the present time. Research development is an underrated role. We bring a lot to the application, but are not seen as a valuable support by many until they experience firsthand the impact we have. And then while AI has tremendous potential to make life easier for academics, much attention should be paid to soften the impact this will have on lower level employees. So in summary, what is the research office view in 5 years' time? So the key takeaways are the research office predicts the top 3 priorities for their research office will remain the same as they are now, namely obtaining more funding to increase the volume of research, demonstrating research impact, that's a typo there, that's what happens when you are sleep deprived and jet lagged when you do your slides. And the third one is improve research quality. So same as now. There'll be a shift in the types of impact research offices think they'll need to measure. Publications and citations lose ground to societal benefit, DEI initiatives, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And this poses a challenge as these are the 3 forms of impact that research offices find hardest to measure. And then finally, we see this misalignment between what the research office sees as their goals and what the researcher perspective is in terms of the support they receive from the research office. And this is probably to do with 2 things. One is the research office being a bit hidden, so there isn't the sort of communication needed for alignment of the goals. But more importantly, the research office takes its direction from the leadership. So these are the vice-chancellors, the provost chancellors, who are looking at the overall strategy for the institute. This is going to be very different from individual researchers who are, basically going day to day trying to get their next grant, their next publication out. And then finally, the acknowledgements. This was done by the Research Professional News team, who are headed up by the editor-in-chief, Sarah Richardson. Chris Parr did the survey and the analysis with other members of the team who are listed here in terms of the graphics and the rest. Thank you very much.